now going from 1 minute after to 2 minutes after, and there's a bunch of stuff to go over today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch in and get everything started. So just as a quick reminder, this is Telling Your Head Start Story Part 2, Impact, Outcomes, and Community. We are recording the webinar today so that people who registered but couldn't actually be here in person can see the recording and watch all the fun stuff we are going to talk about. Acorn Learning is where Head Start goes to sustain positive change. We provide professional development and some consulting services for programs all over the country, particularly around the use of data for quality improvement, management, and basically bringing various skills together that will help programs to sustain positive change in the programs. And today I've got a number of just straightforward things. We're going to have webinar basics, which we always do at the beginning for all the folks who are new to our webinar series. I'm going to talk about storytelling. And for those who've been to several of the other things that we've done around storytelling, those will sound pretty familiar because the basics of storytelling are the same. But particularly today, I am going to emphasize the fact that we are talking about program impact and program outcomes. And that's a little bit different in how we present those stories. So when I talk about impact and outcomes, we're going to talk about what it means for us to communicate these about our programs to the idea of community in a big picture sense. So stakeholders across the board, not just people within programs, but people who are potentially going to engage with your programs as well. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and then we have what's happening with Acorn, which is a bunch of stuff because we just released a whole bunch of new programs coming in, starting with the new program year. So we got a lot of information there, a little longer than we normally do with that. Hopefully I will have time after I'm finished with the substantive part to go over those things in a little bit of detail for you. So I'm Dr. Greg Dixon. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at Acorn Learning. My job is to make sure that we produce high quality learning events that engage with people and that also give you something that you can use in your programs immediately so that you can apply the things you take away from our learning events. That's our biggest emphasis, is really practical application of the various things we do. And one of the things we'll be today talking about some things that you will hopefully be able to go back and do right away in your programs. So once again, some webinar basics. We are being recorded. I said at the beginning, I would say that several times, and this was the last time. So it is being recorded. Live captioning is turned on. Participants are muted until the end where there'll be a chance for a question and answer. We do have a short anonymous survey at the end. I always say this, but I will say it again. We take quality improvement really seriously. We practice what we preach. I'm very interested in hearing from you, not just the sort of basics of whether you like this or not, but other things about this. Were there particular things that you found engaging? So some of those open-ended questions, if you have thoughts, please definitely let us know. We do read through them, we do look at them, and we try to make the changes that we can make to always make these more impactful and more valuable to the folks who attend them. Webinar basics slide deck will be emailed at the conclusion of the webinar along with the link to the recording. So all the slides that you're going to see, you will get a file that has all of those in it. Also, there is at the beginning of that, there's a copyright page that basically says if you attended this, you are free to use any of the slides in the slide deck to your heart's content. You just can't charge anyone for them. And if you're going to use it exactly as it is, please do keep that Acorn Learning copyright information visible. The biggest thing that we want people to take away from this is we want you to use what we see. And back in the day, there were some unscrupulous folks who got stuff for free and then tried to charge for it. So we've got that there to prevent that from happening. But we want you to use the different things that we're going to talk about here in your programs. And we're going to talk about ways that you can specifically do that. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to enter them in the chat. I've got the chat window up here on the side along with the lovely faces of those of you who are on video or have an image in there and the names of everybody else. So I will be checking the chat periodically. I may stop and answer the questions. I may hold them till the end, depending on how the timing is going, but also on whether the question is something involving an immediate thing that I'm looking at on the screen. So, storytelling basics. One of the things that we really want to think about when we're communicating about our programs is that the storytelling that we are doing is an extremely valuable part of helping people to understand what we do. We have lots of different audiences. We have internal audiences where we're talking to people within our programs. We have external audiences where we're talking to people who are outside our programs. when we talk about communicating to the community, one of the things that we are talking about is both communicating directly to people that are likely participants in Head Start or current participants in Head Start, but also we're talking to people that are just out in the wider community so they know something about Head Start programs and what they offer. So the storytelling basics that we're going to focus on today are really about engaging a very broad range of stakeholders. And what I'm going to talk about today and the emphasis I'm going to place today is on engaging that largest possible collection of people. If you go looking around for definitions of storytelling, you can find all kinds of them. Literature, movies, television shows. But fortunately for us, we are not trying to sell the folks at Netflix on the next great streaming series because that's really hard to do, expensive and time consuming. We have a different mission involved. What we are trying to do is to communicate a narrative that engages and connects to an audience to convey a specific message. In our focus today, we are trying to let people know the value of our programs to the communities around us. What do we do to benefit the children and families in our communities? And what evidence do we have to show that this is real? This is concrete. This is something that's actually there. And we're going to really place an emphasis on we have a specific message we want to convey, and we are conveying that through a narrative that blends spoken and written material with visual representations of information. So we have 6 components of our storytelling. First and foremost, know your audience, know who you are trying to communicate with. I am going to emphasize that we want to communicate in a lot of these short form story versions and storytelling methods, the broadest possible audience to engage people who cover a lot of different parts of the community around us. So I'm going to emphasize that our audience here is going to be a very broad one, but you always want to think about who it is that you're talking to. You want to have a clear message. You want to think through and define the message you want to communicate before you put all the pieces together to start communicating it, because it will help you to have a straightforward, simple way of getting that across to the people who are in your audience. We want to focus on challenges and overcoming them. This is an engaging part of the human story. It connects to the basic fellow feeling that we all have of, I struggle, I have challenges, and I've worked, and sometimes I've overcome them, and sometimes I haven't. And when we think about programs as they strive to improve, there's an inherent tension that we want to embrace in the stress of challenges and the efforts to overcome them, especially when you have achievements that show that you have overcome those challenges. And in the Head Start world, because of the nature of the population of people who are eligible for Head Start, there are going to be lots of challenges, both to them as individuals, but also to you as programs that the real world imposes on you. You want to seek personal connections. Whenever possible, you want to engage a connection to individual people in your storytelling. And finally, in storytelling, you want to be authentic. I always say this, and every time I talk about storytelling, it's more important for you to authentically sound like you are communicating with your words and your voice than to get the exact precise wording correctly. You have times where I have to communicate a very particular thing, like a definition of storytelling a moment ago. You can do that. But for the most part, what you want to be using is your own voice. It's more important to sound authentic than it is to have precise wording. So if precise wording means you sound like you're reading it from a piece of paper that was written by somebody else, don't worry about that. Be authentic and get the wording correct enough to communicate your point. And this is one of the challenges that we'll face in some of these short form storytellings we're going to talk about at the end. But one of the biggest things about storytelling with data is humans do not remember data. Humans remember other humans. We are hardwired that way. Data are abstract symbols represented in different ways. People are people. We've been interacting with people for hundreds of thousands of years. We've been interacting with data really since the modern development of symbols and math, which is only about 5,000 to 10,000 years old, depending on who you want to ask. So in storytelling with data, people will forget within seconds complex data visualizations, no matter how cool they are. This is a box and whisker plot. I have the same slide pairing that I had in the webinar last month. For those of you who are going, this looks familiar. If you were here last month, it is familiar, but it's worth stating again. If you are trained in statistics, box and whisker plots are so cool. They're awesome. They communicate an enormous amount of information. If you're not trained in statistics, it's a weird collection of lines and rectangles. And it takes a while to communicate to anyone what is viewed in this chart. And every minute you're explaining how to read a box and whisker plot to someone, you are not telling them the engaging story that you want to tell them. If I put up a picture of a really cute baby holding a big piece of chalk, you will remember this for months. You'll have this thing in your head that automatically does processing of like, oh, that's a cute kid. And why do they have a giant piece of chalk? There's this thing that humans do with other humans. If at the end of this webinar, I ask you to describe the box and whisker plot or to describe this image, you are vastly more likely to remember the basics of this image than anything at all about that box and whisker plot. So this is an important point as we are now going to move into talking about our actual storytelling. You want to build human connections and complex storytelling, no matter how good it is from a technical perspective, is not going to be as good as a simple reference point that people are going to remember. You want that memory to be key. So all of our stories are about people. Data generalizes that story, and data adds an exclamation point to the story we're telling. And this is an important part of this, because what we want to always remember is there's a purpose and a drive and a direction in what we are trying to do. There's a point we want to communicate. We want to do that in the most effective way possible. So impact and outcomes, what we are talking about is I'm going to communicate what our program has accomplished, what we do for the community. So I want to communicate that as clearly as possible. The takeaways are the most important parts of the story. So as I'm constructing my storytelling, I want to build it around these key points that highlight the value of our program to the people who participate in it and to the wider community. A lot of times this is going to be communicated in the form of people who participate in our program accomplish these things that are very challenging and difficult to do. Or there are these challenges that exist in the community, but we help people in our program to overcome them. There's a lot of these pieces that can be communicated, but you want to connect to the widest possible range of audiences with impact and outcomes storytelling, because you want to be able to use the same basic approach for different audiences, but also in a world in which your social media engagement and your online content production is going to be part of how a lot of people see you for the first time. People who may not know anything about Head Start at all may engage with you through these things that you don't have a lot of control of, and they're very short. You want to be able to engage with those audiences using effective storytelling. So this is one of the big things with impact and outcomes, is you want to have these very well-crafted stories. So you definitely want to think these things through when you're starting out, but the visualizations of data are going to need to be as simple as you can make them. There was a time not long ago where people did have a real debate about, well, I might want a more complicated visualization for this audience and a simpler visualization for that audience. That's really falling away from the wayside. We have a lot of people doing cognitive science research, organizational psychology research, looking at what's the most effective way to communicate stories. Even with sophisticated, well-trained, advanced audiences, the simple storytelling, the simple visuals actually still works better for making an impact on them. So there's much less of a debate than there used to be. Simplicity is both effective at reaching a broad audience of non-technically trained people, but also helping people who you are communicating to that are sophisticated consumers of data, the point you are trying to make. So the focus should be on the story that you are trying to tell, and coming up with a simple and straightforward method for communicating that story. So everything we've talked about so far has me talking about concepts, everything else. Now what we're going to see is, what does this look like in practice with actual visualizations that you might know and be familiar with, and techniques that you're going to tackle. So I'm going to start off with this. This is school readiness outcomes. For 10 years, we have been producing this graph as part of a workbook for programs that use my teaching strategies. This is very straightforward. This has been used effectively to communicate outcomes for a decade. And we make it. So it's our product. So, like, yay, I'm proud of all the hard work that we're doing. And I'm going to strongly suggest that you not use this in your storytelling anymore. And I'm going to talk about this and the evolution of how you storytell with this information as a way of demonstrating this principle of taking things that you're familiar with and simplifying them so that you have that storytelling arc that can really land with people. So a couple orientation pieces. First and foremost, my teaching strategies. The y-axis on the far left-hand side shows the percentage of children who met or exceeded school readiness expectations. In the fall, lightest blue, winter, middle blue, and spring, the darkest blue. Each column represents the percentage of children who met or exceeded expectations in the respective domains: social, emotional, cognitive, language, literacy, mathematics, and physical. So very straightforward, very simple column chart in the sense that we're familiar with these. We see them a lot. When we are trying to aim for the widest audience, there are a couple of things in here that it's important for us to remember. The first is that for people who understand early childhood education, outcomes analysis, and understand my teaching strategies, or for that matter, DRDP or CORE or any of the other ones, the idea that you have these domains is something that's familiar. For everybody else on planet Earth, the idea of these domains is not necessarily familiar or intuitive. If you asked a person, what's the difference between literacy and language? I mean, they might be able to tell you something. Does it match what my teaching strategies does for separating these domains? Does it match the frameworks that are used as the foundation of this across all the different types of instruments? It's not an intuitive thing for people as to what skills you're talking about. The other question of it is, how does the underlying shift go? Like what expectations? What does that mean? One of the challenges with this is a visualization like this is meant to show progress. Your program helps children to improve over time. It's easy for someone who's not familiar with the subject matter to get lost in a chart like this because you have these different areas in these different spaces. If we're trying to reach the largest audience possible, we have to think about that. Now, does that mean you never use this chart? No, that means that you use this chart with the people where it is appropriate, but that's actually a pretty narrow range of people. You might use this for internal storytelling in a grant application where people are going to be familiar with these. You might have it there. But to a general audience, is this the kind of thing that you put in a social media post or even an annual report? You would have seen things like this in annual reports a few years ago. In fact, you probably still see some of them in there now. But is this the best way of telling the story of progress to this wider audience, to an audience that isn't as familiar? I'm going to make the case that no, it's not. And I'm going to talk about how to simplify a visual like this to use it for impact and outcome storytelling in a way that addresses the largest possible audience. So, first wave simplification. Significantly reduced what you're seeing on the screen. First and foremost, I picked math because of two things. Number one, most people, if you say, do you understand math as an area that people learn skills in? Almost everybody has an idea of math. There's an intuitive sense of it. And you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining math. I don't have to say what's the difference between language or literacy or what criteria. Math, there's a visceral, basic understanding of what math is. Also, math happens to be, the second part here, you started out the lowest at 69. And you show a lot of progress from that 69% to the 93%. But let's look at the number of ways that this is simplified first and foremost. I have removed the legend that said fall, winter, spring on the side of the graph. I have replaced it with labels inside the columns themselves. So fall, winter, and spring appear as text inside the columns. I accomplished this by the radical choice of using text boxes in the PowerPoint presentation to fill that in and then putting them on top of the chart. So I'm able to take the chart from the more sophisticated Tableau visualization, take a screenshot of it, and then add these text features in just using PowerPoint. Much easier to see if you add them so that the whole thing, the background image and the text boxes are a group, resizing them and moving them is easier. So this is not some big, giant, sophisticated piece of technology used to simplify this down. This is adjusting some of the features and functions in Tableau to make a simpler visualization, and then adding basic things in PowerPoint. This is nice. I still have a progress story, 69, 85, 93. But is this as simple as we can make it to tell our progress story? And the answer here is no. If we're telling a story of progress, there are some elements here in the visual that we don't really need. Again, widest possible audience, simplest possible visualization that tells our takeaway point. We have helped children to be ready for school. This is a stage 2 simplification. I have taken away the y-axis entirely because I have data labels at the top of my columns that give the numbers that I want people to focus on. Also, I'm being honest about scale. Each of these columns is the appropriate height for the percentages that you see. So it's an appropriate visualization, both ethically and visually, to represent the numbers. The data labels mean I don't have to have a whole axis on the side. I've retained the fall, winter, spring. I've also gotten rid of all of the different elements that had descriptions or other pieces, and I have replaced them with a headline. The number of children who met or exceeded expectations in math increased to 93%. So our story here is a story of progress from 69% of children meeting or exceeding expectations in the fall to 93% in the spring. A person looking at this visual can see progress very clearly as each column, as we move from left to right, is higher than the column before. Visually, even if you don't register the data labels, you see the image we want to communicate, which is progress over time. If you have the opportunity to narrate along with this in the headline, you can do additional explanations of it. So if you are doing this as a PowerPoint slide, you can explain the way that this fits into the bigger picture of kindergarten readiness by indicating that 93% of children meeting or exceeding expectations is a reflection of preparation of these kids for school. If I were presenting this publicly and I were doing it in a place like San Diego and referring to how a San Diego program had gotten to 93% of expectations, I might compare this to the K through 12 system and say, students in 8th grade in San Diego Unified School District, only 42% of them are able to do math at grade level. So having them at 93%, this is a huge, huge accomplishment. Things like that. There's a lot of things you can do with this depending on the format. But even if you're building a social media post around this, you have a very easy headline visual combination to communicate your takeaway point, which is progress. Your program helped these children to make progress throughout the course of the year. You can add an individual child's story. The Head Start California has been very effective at this with some of their value of Head Start marketing, with these little individual stories of, my son came in and he wasn't even speaking. He didn't ever talk to strangers. He was not verbal at all. And he actually now talks and communicates in a perfectly normal way. If we were using language or social emotional, we could use elements like that to tell an interesting story. And then the visual represents how that story of this one child is general and represents the program's impact overall. And this means that participants in this program who live in this community are directly benefiting, and they are going to be more ready for kindergarten. They have a better launching pad into their K through 12 education, and we would expect that they would have better outcomes as a result. Now, key for us in data storytelling is we have gone from a very traditional, complex visualization of the data to a much simpler one. So rather than having something that requires a lot of explanation, a lot of storytelling, orienting the audience, potentially having to explain questions about what the different domains mean, now we have something much simpler. What's my takeaway point? We have prepared children for school. We've shown this demonstrably because we can show the progress they're making through the year. I don't need the whole big complicated thing. I just need my simple one on the right. So when we talk about simplification of visualizations and taking visualizations towards that more general audience, this is what we're talking about. You can have the big complicated thing and you can use it if you want to for specific narrower audiences. But to reach a broader, more general audiences, you want the visual on the right. It's simple, it's easy, it communicates progress in a very clear way with visual representations that are natural human interpretive elements. Bigger, taller on the right-hand side, stronger. This is important. This is a progress story that simplifies the information on that chart into a story of progress. Because the chart is fall, winter, spring, it's designed to show progress. But do you want to talk about outcomes and just talk about not necessarily where they started and where they got to, but just where they were at the end? Again, you could use a chart like the one on the left here, but there are also other ways to do this visually, like this. I'm not going to even have a chart at all. I just have little boxes. And in those boxes are the 6 domains and where everyone was at the end. This is a visualization using those boxes with, in this case, a descriptive header up on top. Percentage of children who met or exceeded expectations at the end of the school year. Again, this is what you would typically see for a lot of people who are just showing this as a visual. To transform this into something that could instantly be on social media, we get rid of the descriptor and we place it with a headline. More than 93% of children met or expected expectations in every domain in our program this year. So you are clearly communicating the success of the kids in the program in this way that does not require a lot of cognitive work to figure out. This is not communicating progress because it's not showing the change over time, but it is communicating the outcome that you have achieved, which is that if childs attend your program, this is what they can expect, because this is what you've demonstrated that you've done in the future. And again, you can have stories about individual children striving, families that have come in. You have a human story that you can tell if you're doing this in a video, if you're doing it in a narrative format. But the visual here is extremely simple. So thinking back ahead, that complicated chart requires explanation. That's not necessarily something people who are not data people are going to engage with, to these much simpler visualizations, communicating impact and outcomes through simple, straightforward representations of the information. This is one of the big things that you want to start practicing. And there's a lot of kind of fun that can come with this because you're trying to think of what's going to be the best way to get it across. I would strongly encourage everybody who is in this webinar and everybody watching it out there, anyone watching the video on the recording or anybody watching it live, go back and take a look at the way you communicate with data. Go find your more complicated charts. How would you simplify them? How would you transform this chart that you made for a board report? Could you turn that into a social media post with a very, very simple visualization of the data? I think that these are the kinds of exercises that a lot of programs could do. You probably already have a lot of good foundations for this. You don't have to reinvent wheels. So the simplification is a big part of it. The other thing that you can do is we do have a lot of tools now that allow us to do some visuals that communicate in a not quite as simple way, but a still powerful visual way. And an example of this is to use these sort of population pieces. So each of the 2 blocks you see on the left and the right are 100 icons. And in this particular case, I'm saying children with an ongoing source of continuous, accessible healthcare on the left-hand side at the time of application. The dark green baby icons represent the kids who already had a medical home. And I'll talk about medical home versus the language in the actual header there in a moment. But the light gray baby icons do not have a medical home. The dark green ones do. At the time of application, 36%, 36 out of 100 of the children had it. That's actually a real statistic. 36% of kids in poverty have a medical home, according to the folks at the Census Bureau. At the end of the first year, 96% of the kids have a medical home. The average in Head Start programs is like 95.4. So I made it 96. So 96%, 96 of our little baby icons have transformed to being green at the end of the first year. So this is a visualization of progress, a visualization of the increase in the number of families that have a medical home. There's two pieces to this that I do want to highlight. First and foremost, in my header, in the headline up at the top, I do not use the phrase medical home. We're communicating to the broadest possible audience. The average person doesn't know what a medical home is. They do understand continuous accessible healthcare. And so I'm using language that's going to register with my target audience, which is the broadest possible people. If you were doing this just for people who work in Head Start, medical home will make sense. Or will it? This is a question I have that is always interesting when to ask programs. Does everybody in a program know what it means to have a medical home? You may know that it's a requirement, you may know that it's there, but do they actually know what that means in practice? I'm going to say probably, since it's a really important part of Head Start programs. But when you're talking to that broader audience, maybe even to your board, are they going to know what that means? Use language in your headlines that is going to resonate with the largest possible number of people. So this looks weird because there's a whole bunch of these icons. You're like, oh, this is kind of cool, but wow, this must take a lot of time. It doesn't. In PowerPoint, I would recommend that you build a templated slide deck that has a couple things like this where you just have these things built. I've got a PowerPoint template that literally has 100 of these icons laid out this way so that we can build these easier. And then you just select however many of them you want to change colors on, and you can change the color. If you don't want it to be a baby, you want it to do something else, you can actually go through and change the icons as a group collectively without having to do anything one by one. The simple things are actually simple. Having a template you can just copy and add in and adjust as you need to is an important part of it. One of the other things is that the way I'm presenting it right here, visually registers in the audience as a bunch more people. A lot more babies have healthcare. They're not going to automatically do the numbers in their heads. In fact, I don't know that if I was just looking at this off the top of my head, that I would get the numbers. I built this and I used numbers to do it. And I've presented this in a dry run a couple of times. And so it's easy for me to grab it visually. But for other people, it might not be. If the specific number matters, you can use something like this, where you're labeling either above or to the side or below the actual percentage. So if you're trying to communicate this with the specifics, you can add different elements to do that. But the key here is this is another progress story. It is leading to an achievement that you have in the program, one that is an important story to tell to people. Particularly, this, on one hand, shows your accomplishments as, hey, we got everybody connected to a medical home. But you also want to think about the power of something like this. For instance, if you shared it on social media, either through a blog post or directly just in a post, people who don't otherwise know you, who might be eligible for your program, will see this, or they know someone who's eligible for the program and see this and say, oh, wow, they connect you with healthcare. I know some people who would potentially be interested in that because they have kids. It builds a perception and a presence in your potential audiences that will make other things you might want to do in the future, like recruitment, potentially easier. You don't really know the impact of those unless you measure that separately, but it's something that you do want to consider if your program is actively using social media as a recruitment tool, which you should be in the modern world. If you're not, you want to think about that. But these kinds of things are a subtle way of engaging in ongoing recruitment efforts throughout the year. Talking about your impact in a simple, visually interesting way in a very simple post will help you then when you come back, because people will have heard of you. They may not remember this, but they have a positive association in the future. You can also use this same style if you want to show change over time. So if you do want to show progress in a different way, in this particular case, I use different colors of blue. I do recommend, for colorblind reasons, using palettes that use shading so it's easier for people to see. The darkest blue, this is how many people came in the fall. In the winter, we added another group, got us to 61%. And by the end of the spring, we were at 99%. Just doing the same thing with color coding. And here is an example where I have removed the baby icon and replaced it with a mother holding a child icon. Again, just by selecting all 100 of them and going up to the change image to the other icon. As long as you're using any of the regular human form icons, you can pretty much swap them and not have to worry about it. And it's kind of fun to play with and see what happens with different ones that you can use, because you may find a lot of different things that you can use with this. So I've made a lot of references to social media, different things like that. I do want to emphasize also that your traditional things like your annual reports, your board report slides could also use all of these visual techniques as well. But when we think about being able to reach out and to engage with the community, we do want to think about new media in this as well. And just like anything else, who are we trying to reach? With new media, you're trying for a much more general audience than you typically are with something like a board report or something like a grant application. But even in those other forms, those simplified methods can be really good. But in social media, it's going to change how you can approach storytelling. You still have a central goal. You have this thing that you want, one take-home thing, but you have so little time to grab a hold of their attention that you need to be visually interesting, and you need to get your point across right there. You got about 15 seconds to get their attention and get them to spend the next 45 seconds actually absorbing the information in your visuals. And so in doing this, you want to be sure that you are building things that will engage with people. One of the things that I'll be talking about in more depth tomorrow in the Head Start California webinar that we're doing with them is building these specific kinds of infographics that are modular. And so essentially what they look like is this. I did not come up with this. This is a piece of an annual report from the YMCA of Greater Columbus. One of their folks was in our data analyst certificate class, and I was talking about how, this would be really cool. I'm going to build these different things for a class. He says, or we've already got it. This is an actual page from their annual report, and it is a fantastic example of how there's a theme that goes continuously through this page. Simple visuals combined with narration are communicating the key ideas here. And so I just love this. This was absolutely perfect. It's way better than what I would have built as a demo. And they were kind enough to let me use it in a webinar like this. If you look in the upper left, meeting the families where they are is talking about engagement with the specific families. The text underneath it is talking about food assistance, which is supported by an image immediately below that talks about food assistance. Now, the person who did this, he's really clever. 72% of families access food assistance. The plate is a pie chart with 72%. So he's extra level clever. I would not have thought to do that. But this is something that is really interesting in deploying this. In crisis assistance, which is the next little module there, supported 50% of families. And again, he has this dark red, lighter red with the exclamation point where it's a 50-50. And he has a headline there. Half of all families received support through crisis assistance and preventive health education. What's key here is not just that you have all this information together. And in the bottom right, where it says the big picture, is a final headline, take-home point. These percentages paint a powerful story. YMCA Head Start isn't just about education, it's about supporting families every step of the way. That is the kind of thing where you have these simple visuals using your real data, telling a powerful story about your impact. This was in an annual report. You can also split each of these subsets out and use them in things like social media posts. So you could take just the crisis assistance part of it, transform that into a social media post about how important it is. And here's where we go back to that storytelling piece. Families are struggling today. A lot of families, far more families that are willing to talk about it, fall into moments of crisis. It's very important for us as communities to help these families in crisis. At Hometown Head Start, we are an important part of our community's ways of helping families in crisis. In fact, 50% of our families got crisis assistance last year. Simple things that you can put into social media posts. You can build a theme that you are going to address, and you can have weekly or every 2 weeks, whatever works for your organization and your capacity, where you are constantly talking about the power and impact that you're having in the community using very short, very simple storytelling techniques. Again, what are you trying to do in the big picture of your engagement with the community? Show your value, show your impact, show the power of what you're doing. You don't need fancy charts. You don't need big, complicated ones. This communicates things very effectively, and all the individual component pieces can come together in your annual reports. You got to go do a board report. They're going to love a slide like this more than one that's full of a giant bunch of text that's involved. So I strongly recommend that people think about these kinds of visual representations. This is not big, it's not complicated, it's simple, and you can build this in a lot of different presentation formats. This is a screenshot of video content. If you're not using video content, I understand there's a lot of things that get in the way of doing that for newer programs. But I would also say that the technology to use video content is becoming much, much more accessible. So you want to take a look at it, even if you haven't. This particular snapshot is a snapshot from Canva in a piece of video where I'm just talking with a little screen behind me, and Canva will let you remove the background and put a big Acorn Learning thing on it, although you probably would rather have your own Head Start programs background on it. But we put an Acorn Learning background on it, and I can put Canva generated images, graphics, and text onto the video and have it pop in and pop out as we go. I didn't want to play an actual video here because sometimes video gets wonky on people's systems, so I just did a screenshot. But children meeting or exceeding expectations in math grew by 24% from the start of the year, 69% to the end of the year, 93% to keep with our themes and data we've already been showing. And I have the visual reference here of the start of the year to the end of the year. In the video, I can provide the direct narration to go with the data that I'm showing. And within Canva, I have limited ability, but I do have some ability to put some animations in here. So there's little pieces that you can do in this new media content to bring these things to people in different ways. But again, to get to this, I've simplified. I'm not putting that big chart up there. I'm just putting the takeaway point. We help people make progress on getting ready for school. Are they ready for kindergarten? 93% of the kids have met or exceeded those expectations. We definitely help kids get ready for kindergarten. These are the kind of stories that you can tell. So don't be afraid to explore video content. And even if you don't have cameras and pieces like that that will help you record yourself, you can build videos with just the imagery. And microphones are relatively inexpensive. We use the Yeti microphones from the folks at Blue. They're relatively inexpensive, get a nice stand for it. I can't show you because I'm talking into the microphone, so that would be disruptive of it, but you can put them in place, use them really easily. All this stuff is much less expensive than it used to be. A good quality microphone with voiceover on an image rich video in Canva, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute long, really easy to do. Also, nice, simple social media posts that have really clear indications of things. Hometown Head Start, 96% of our families have access to healthcare. Again, I didn't say medical home because most people aren't going to know what that is. And then I have a little call to action here. Learn more or apply at hometownheadstart.org. There is no Hometown Head Start. I don't know if there's a hometownheadstart.org. We did search that a few years ago and there wasn't one. There may have been one created since then, but this is a simple thing. This is a template in Canva. This slide here took me about 8 minutes to create. And the key here is I have a real data point. I am communicating outcomes. I have real information here. 96% of our families have access to healthcare. This is a real data point, real storytelling, real information, but I'm communicating it in a way that will engage the largest possible audience. This is storytelling with data on social media in a way that is hopefully going to help us to tell the story and the impact. What are we doing? What is the impact we have in the community? Hey, Head Start helps people to get access to healthcare. That's what we do. Come talk to us. Again, this is something where you can do this as a celebration, and doing this as a celebration, it's like, oh, wow, that's awesome. But it's also a call to action for people who may not otherwise interact with your program, may not know you exist, may not have an impression of you. Even if the person seeing this is never, ever going to be eligible for Head Start and they're never, ever going to walk into your program, Someone who sees this goes, that's awesome. They have a positive impression of you. You've left a positive impression in their mind of Head Start and your program as a whole. So there's lots of different things you can do. You want to put these things together in human-centric stories. Practice your delivery. If you are going to do this in a way where you're actually providing narration, practice, but do not memorize it. Make sure that you can speak authentically. Practice with an audience if you can. If you are going to record video, practice with the camera, engaging with the camera, talking to the camera, keeping eye contact with that little dot in the middle of the camera so that you can engage clearly with the person on the other end of that camera. You can provide that engagement with them. So practice in the media that you're going to use. If it's static media, show it to as many people as you can so that you can get an idea of how people will take away the impressions. If we go back to our social media post here, I would not just post this because I did it in 8 minutes. I would send this to a number of people and I would say, tell me about this. What do you think? Should I change things around? Is this a good representation? Does this color scheme look corny? Like what's going on? I have the social media savvy of a rock being rolled across a floor. So I always have to ask people, what does this look like? How does this work? We have a lot of eyeballs that go onto things in order to tell us kind of where we are. And we improve over time. So don't be afraid to adapt. Don't be afraid to try new things. Keep an eye out for what's out there. Remember, there's a lot of platforms out there that if you look at the list price, they can be expensive, but they have education versions that have all the utilities, all the different pieces of the puzzle. How might you use that? It might be that you have $1,000 platform where the education version is $100, and you can have up to 5 people get licenses to that for your $100. That's easy, and that's definitely the kind of thing that you want to take a look at. So don't be afraid to adapt. Don't be afraid to try new things. Tools to use. I have become a big fan of Canva. When we first got Canva at Acorn, I was a little, I was not the easiest person to convince, but I have been sold on it as one of the broadest range of options available to you for the smallest amount of money versions of things that are out there. They have tons of templates. Since they expanded to include the ability to edit videos, it is a very handy tool. They're not as nice as using a fancier like Adobe Creative Suite software platform, but they are pretty solid and they're certainly good enough for social media. And you can do basics like create a little animated intro for your organization using your organization's logo, followed by 45 seconds of information, followed by a quick little outro that has a little plate on it with hyperlinks to all your different programs things. Easy to do, and they have tons of templates. Prezi is a nice platform to build presentations that are interactive and dynamic. It does have a learning curve that's not small. It takes some getting used to. Prezi also has a number of features for things where you want to have you can basically have an infographics builder and other things that come with the Prezi subscription, and they are education friendly. Microsoft 365, you can build things in PowerPoint, you can build things in Publisher. I strongly recommend that every single program go put together a PowerPoint that's just templates for a bunch of little visualizations that you can play around with that work and that get across pretty clearly. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And every time you turn around, there's a bunch of free platforms out there that are doing more things for people who want to do these kind of things. I do always say, be careful with free. Always take a look and see whether they have a bunch of data gathering and other things that are like, uh, certain platforms that I won't name, like TikTok, which I guess I just named, will collect a lot of data when you're using the platforms. So you do want to be aware of those things. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. Okay, we are at the Q&A portion. What I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to run through the coming at Acorn. I'm going to come back to this slide and then I will take any questions because I don't see a bunch of questions in the chat. And just to let everybody know, Acorn Learning has just released a lot of stuff. So I'm going to run through them pretty quickly and then I'll come back to the question and answer so that we can go as long as we have. So what's happening at Acorn? Tons of stuff. Next week, July 1st, we have the Manager Skills Certificate, which is our new certificate that is management skills. It's how to actually do things like hold better meetings, how to motivate staff, the basics of management skills. There's lots of good programs out there that are Head Start focused about requirements, performance standards, and things like that. That's not what we're doing. We're talking about how do you communicate with confidence to the staff that report to you and to the ones you have to report up to. How do you engage and help motivate people in the complicated world we all live in? How do you organize better meetings? Things like that. This is a lot of really good content. I am on this little slide that says I'm there. I've been booted off. We're actually going to have somebody who's coming into this meeting from a program. She's a program director whose program has implemented some of the things that we will be teaching because we tried them out in a number of workshops that we did. So this is a big information session next week, 11 a.m. to 11:30. If you cannot make those times, still register for it because like this, we will send the recording out there. So free information session, come check us out. Our next webinar, July 30th, is FA1 review preparation. For those of you who know Stephanie Tesh or who have worked with her in the work she's done with Acorn, she's going to be here with another program leader to talk about FA1 preparation and what they did for their FA1 prep this past year. A lot of people have been asking for this class. So here it is, Visualizing Head Start Data in Excel. We have a data analyst certificate class. It's a more expensive class, a more complicated class. A lot of people have said, I'm nervous about taking on something that complicated. Do you have just an introduction to how to do the basics of visualizing data in Excel? We do. And it's coming up in the fall. It is 4 consecutive weeks running between September and October. And it is how to think about getting data out of your program management platforms like Copa, Go, Engage, and Child Plus, and just basic charts, tables, things like that, up to and including the creation of pivot tables and pivot charts. We will not get into the more complicated stuff that the data analyst certificate covers, but we will cover all the basics of visualizing data in Excel. Other things that are coming up, management skills certificate. The pop-up is next week. It actually starts in August. Summer data camp, it's our most popular thing. It's back for the summer, August 13th and 14th coming up. The data analyst certificate and data literacy credential both start in September. Visualizing Head Start data in Excel, the one I just talked about, starts September 19th. There's also a new one that I'm not going to go into because we don't have time, practical data skills for Head Start. Think about the kind of things that the data literacy credential covers, but orienting it towards what can I go back into my program and do? How do I build the specifics of what I want to go through? More information on acornlearning.com. Back to the question and answer. So does anybody have any questions about any of what I have talked about? I am happy to answer questions at this point. Either drop them in the chat or unmute and have at it.